literally a month or two after he steps down and the day he calls the election, his buddy, who he knew at Brookfield, is now the CEO of Brookfield and is in China that literally the day the election is called.
News broke today of a story about Mark Carney allegedly lobbying the mayor of Beijing in October of 2024, right before he announced his bid for the Liberal leadership. However, we decided to take a deeper look at Mark Carney and Brookfield Asset Management. We wanted to try to understand just how deep that relationship goes, as well as what Mark Carney, not Canadians, stands to gain from being Prime Minister of Canada. And we unpack what he isn't saying in front of the cameras.
Let's take a look. From the Western Standard, Mark Carney lobbied mayor of Beijing ahead of Liberal leadership race.
Mark Carney, only weeks before seeking the Liberal leadership, lobbied Beijing's mayor to, quote, deepen cooperation, end quote, according to official Chinese records. Carney on October 20th lobbied the Beijing mayor as chair of Brookfield Asset Management, according to an official account by the People's Government of Beijing, disclosed Wednesday by the Epoch Times. Carney, the longtime economic advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, sought to explore, quote, growth potential of investing in China, end quote. Yet, according to Blacklock's reporter, Cabinet at the same time has censured the Chinese Communist Party for unfair trade practices that would, quote, cripple our own industry, end quote.
So this was rather interesting. Now, we know that there's been some timelines that have been put out recently, and we started thinking about this, and this started to feel really strange. So we started piecing things together. And I'm not going to go over some of the specifics at this point because it would be out of sequence. So we went back to the very beginning when Brookfield first decided to get into China, and we started finding a whole bunch of other things about Brookfield, and we found some very interesting things going on about Brookfield that are happening right now in the midst of this leadership race.
You mean the election?
Well, yeah, I guess the leadership race for Canada.
The country's leadership race, yeah.
So now, one of the things that we were trying to look for is this alleged article from the government of Beijing, because we didn't find it in the article for Western Standard. We didn't find it, the link to it in Blacklock's reporter, because they were just referencing the Epoch Times. So we ended up searching for it ourselves, and I am pleased to say we found it and a bunch more. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back in 2013. Brookfield to invest in Shanghai property portfolio. This is the first foray from Brookfield into China as far back as we can see. So this goes back to October 31st, Halloween of 2013, where Brookfield invested over $750 million into Chinese real estate. They continued to expand their portfolio into China, and you can see that over the next 12 years, they've expanded from real estate to renewable power to private equity. There are many, many, many holdings now in China from Brookfield. So it would really benefit Brookfield and therefore Mark Carney's investments if there was more investment put into China now, wouldn't it?
Well, and I just want to make the point that for those of you who may be small business owners, us included, do you think you can just walk up to anyone in China and be like, hey, I want to spend $750 million on real estate as a Canadian citizen? Is that okay? They're not going to let you do that.
No.
So why was Brookfield permitted to? Well,
and this is the real question. So let's keep going. So this isn't for you to read. What this is a report that essentially goes over the major investment that Brookfield made in energy at that time by acquiring a specific company. And that company has many interests in China. Isn't that interesting? So they are getting deeper into the quote unquote green energy into China. And this is in 2014. This is in 2018, where Mark Carney is still the governor of the Bank of England. He decides to have a meeting with Yi Gang, governor of the People's Bank of China. What did they discuss? Global economic developments, deepening China-UK economic and financial cooperation, and other related issues. So this is really the first conversation that we found that was documented between Mark Carney and the head of the People's Bank of China. Now, in 2019, Brookfield makes another real estate purchase for around $1.7 billion, buying a complex in Shanghai. So you can tell that even up to now, like, Brookfield has only been in China for around 6 years, and they are spending a ton of money in China. So in 2020, August 11th to be exact, Trudeau asks Mark Carney for help to start advising his government. Why is this significant? Well, this is basically in the middle of COVID, right? COVID started in March of 2020. This is August of 2020. So Trudeau's like, hey, Mark, what do we do? And Mark Carney says, I know, print a bunch of money. That'll sort out all your problems. And what did that end up causing? Hyperinflation, everybody. Wow, what great advice from, a former governor of the Bank of Canada and Bank of England. So Mark Carney starts advising Justin Trudeau and continues to do so over the next 4 years. Now, August is a very significant month in 2020. August 11th is a significant date in 2020 as well. Why is that? Well, almost exactly 2 weeks later, on August 26th of 2020, Mr. Carney joins Brookfield Asset Management as vice chair and head of ESG and impact fund investing. So isn't that interesting? Right before he joins Brookfield Asset Management, he starts advising Justin Trudeau and the government of Canada on a pro bono basis. I wonder why he did it on a pro bono basis. Well, he would have known that he was either in the running or about to start as the vice chair of Brookfield Asset Management a couple of weeks later. So it would be in his best interest to start telling Mr. Trudeau what to actually spend money on from a federal government standpoint, because it would directly affect the Brookfield asset portfolio. Isn't that interesting? Let's continue.
On August 11th of 2022, the following story was run by Reuters. Mark Carney to chair Brookfield Asset Management post-spin-out.
So this effectively makes Mark Carney the head of Brookfield Asset Management. So evidently he did such a great job in advising Justin Trudeau to spend a bunch of money that most likely benefited Brookfield Assets, that they said, hey, Mark, you should be the chair of Brookfield Asset Management. Go to town, make us a bunch of money. Now we get into some of the Chinese-related articles. So here's one from March 13th, 2024. Leading investment companies set up offices in Shanghai. What are some of those leading companies, you may be asking? Well, that would be Brookfield Asset Management, everybody. They just keep on deepening and deepening and deepening their intertwined investments within the middle of China. Now, Mark Carney has been on record saying that China is basically, they're going to be the center of the new world trade, and we need to really invest in them and pour a bunch of money into China, because they're going to be at the center of everything. So we need to really increase our partnership with them. Now, shortly after that announcement was made, Mark Carney and a bunch of other executives from the West got an invite.
March 27th of 2024, Mark Carney meets Xi as China woos the West.
This was a meeting between Xi Jinping and a whole bunch of executives that they brought into China to try to lure even more investment into China and dump a bunch of money into China's economy. How nice for them.
On September 9th of 2024, Mark Carney to chair Leaders Task Force on Economic Growth.
This is where Mark Carney joined the Liberal Party of Canada's financial task force.
And if you remember last summer, 2024, there was talks of Justin Trudeau getting rid of Chrystia Freeland and bringing Carney on as the finance minister. But that didn't happen. Carney kept saying no. And I think now with hindsight, we can say that perhaps the reason was because he didn't want to have to disclose his dealings with Brookfield, with China, if he became a minister.
Well, and the other hypothesis is maybe he had a bigger plan, which was to say, you know what, I don't want that job. I want Justin Trudeau's job. Let's continue. This is right off of the People's Government of Beijing government website, folks. This is the this is the big document that the Western Standard and Blacklock's Reporter and the Epoch Times was actually referring to. So the mayor, Yin Yang, meets with chair of Brookfield Asset Management and vice chairman of BlackRock, respectively. BlackRock, for those who don't know, is one of the world's largest investment hedge funds. They own everything everywhere. So it says, on the afternoon of October 20th, Yin Yang, mayor of Beijing, held separate meetings with Mark Carney, chair of Brookfield Asset Management and former governor of Bank of England, and Philip Hildebrand, vice chairman of BlackRock and former chairman of the governing board of the Swiss National Bank. Both guests came to Beijing for the annual conference of Financial Street Forum 2024.
Both foreign guests expressed strong confidence in the development prospects and growth potential of investing in China, stating that the annual conference of Financial Street Forum serves as an important platform for building consensus on cooperation among all parties and conveys confidence in collaborative development. Carney highlighted Brookfield Asset Management's keen interest in seizing development opportunities in China, further expanding its business in Beijing, and deepening cooperation with relevant partners in areas such as green finance, fund management, and infrastructure investment.
So this is very interesting. Sounds like Mark Carney, based on what his advice has been to Brookfield, based on all the meetings he's had, been in meetings with the president of China, and attended meetings there, has attended meetings with the mayor of Beijing, has expressed his views of strong collaboration and we need to deepen our partnership with Beijing and China, has encouraged Brookfield to spend billions upon billions and billions of dollars in China. Sounds like he's very pro-China. Sounds like that to me. Mm-hmm. Sounds like his values of getting rich are very closely aligned with China. Let's continue. Shortly after that, in November of 2024, this is the infamous $250 million loan that Mr. Carney secured from the Bank of China in order to help refinance their $700 million offshore investment within the Chinese real estate market. So this is what we talked about the other day that caused all these questions about Mark Carney being beholden to China, since Brookfield has a $250 million loan with the Bank of China. Now, we were wondering, how the heck would he have gotten that loan from the Bank of China? Oh, right. Back in 2018, he established a relationship with the head of the Bank of China when he was the head of the Bank of England. Funny how these things work out and how these favors come home to roost. Let's keep going. Shortly after that, as we all know, Mark Carney decided to say, you know what? To heck with getting rich. I want to be poor, and I'm going to run for the Prime Minister of Canada. And he ended up winning that Liberal leadership race, and he was sworn in on March 14th, 2025. As we all know, the election kicked off basically a week or a week and a half after that. And now we're in the middle of this. And Mark Carney is getting a bunch of questions on being beholden to China and all of this. Well, something else is going on while this was happening. On the day the election was called, on March 23rd, the new CEO and chairman of Brookfield is in China chatting with them about deepening partnerships and encouraging multinational companies to expand their investment. Now, the article here is dated March 24th, but China is ahead of us. So it was actually March 23rd in Canada when this was actually happening. So I don't regard this as a coincidence, folks. Look at the history of Brookfield and China and Mark Carney and the Chinese officials, the president of China, president of the Bank of England, mayor of Beijing, and he sets all this in motion literally right before he decides to step down and run for the Liberal leadership, becoming Prime Minister of Canada.
So the question is our current Prime Minister beholden to China?
Well, it seems that he is in some way, shape, or form, especially since literally a month or two after he steps down and the day he calls the election, his buddy, who he knew at Brookfield, is now the CEO of Brookfield and is in China that literally the day the election is called.
But not only that, Mark Carney won't disclose his assets to the Canadian citizens. We're expected to possibly vote for this man and not know what his holdings are.
We've already played this clip, and you may remember it, but it becomes that much more significant now.
Hi, Steve Chase from the Globe and Mail. I got one question and one follow-up. The first question is about these issues that Mr. Poilievre raised yesterday. He's suggesting you're beholden to China. He talked about your regular visits to China. You went there at the time when Xi was trying to show the world that he's open for business. You went back in the fall. Then Brookfield secured a $276 million loan for some property there. I guess that was underwater. Was that a sweetheart loan? Are you beholden to China?
Absolutely not. First thing. Second thing I'll say, look, Mr. Poilievre doesn't understand the world. Mr. Poilievre is a lifelong politician. It's all he's ever done. These slogans, sound bites, slander, doesn't understand how the world works. China happens to be our second largest trading partner. It's our second largest trading partner. We have trade disputes with China right now, caused by them in the agriculture sector. It's one of the areas which we need to engage on. It's one of the areas, when you think about, again, the auto sector and the future of the auto sector, we've got to understand where China is, where China is going, whether or not there's any room for partnership in that. Look, I'm beholden to absolutely no one except to the Canadian people. I am here for the Canadian people. Steve, your follow-up?
Yeah, follow-up.
Continue. Continue.
The Chinese ambassador's given, I think, 3 or 4 interviews in the last few weeks talking about his interest in reopening free trade talks. My question for you is, as we try to diversify away from the United States and reduce our reliance on our trade with the United States, is it your belief that we should be increasing our trade with China?
Look,
and reopening free trade talks.
Here's my view on this broader set of issues. We need to diversify our trade as a country. We are over-reliant on, as wonderful as the trade going across that bridge, we are over-reliant on the United States. I think it's a lesson we've all learned. We need to diversify. We want to diversify with like-minded partners. That's why I went to Europe in my first days as Prime Minister. Spoke first with European President von der Leyen, obviously met with the French President, and then separately, because it's not part of Europe anymore, as you know, the United Kingdom, in terms of building trade with them. There are partners in Asia that we can build deeper ties. There is certain activity that, but the partners in Asia that share our values don't include China.
He says the first people he went to see was the Europeans. I would dispute that, Mr. Carney. I would very much dispute that. The first people you went to see was the president of China and the mayor of Beijing. That's who you went to see. And you also went to see the head of the Bank of China as well. And you did that in October and November of 2024. And you've been directing the company Brookfield to dump money into China over and over and over again. You went there to meet with President Xi Jinping to say that, we're open for business and we want to deepen our investments into China. We want to be more collaborative with China. And you said the same thing with the mayor of Beijing. Now you want the Canadian people to believe that you don't want to deal with China? Really? So folks, why would Mark Carney, making all this money, decide to be Prime Minister of Canada? Well, here's our thought. Mark Carney has spent over a decade building relationships with the hyper elite in China. Now, as the Prime Minister of Canada, he now has the ability to leverage these relationships with other countries as the middleman. He can help be the gatekeeper to China. And who knows what this is going to mean for the Brookfield investment portfolio that's over there. The problem is only Mark Carney knows. And Canadians don't, because we don't see what is in his asset portfolio. So the only thing that seems to make sense here is the main reason that he would say, you know what, I need to be Prime Minister of Canada is because I can now leverage political power instead of financial power alone. So he now gets to be this middleman between China and a whole bunch of other countries that may be having some difficulty with him, because he has very, very strong relationships with the president and the mayor. Remember, as Tanya alluded to before, you can't just walk into China and drop $750 million on something. You have to go through the People's Republic of China, the United Front Work Department, and the hyper elites that are at the top of Chinese political power. And Mark Carney has done that. He's done that on a series of occasions, to the point the bank can even trust him enough to give him a $250 million loan for Brookfield Asset Management. So this is now dropping the veil on Mark Carney. And this is where all Canadians should be concerned. Is Mark Carney interested in the best interests of Canadians? Hell no. What he seems to be most interested in is increasing vastly his financial portfolio and that of Brookfield Asset Management. And why do we know that? Because Brookfield Asset Management isn't even in Canada anymore. They moved their head office, and all of their investment portfolios and their bank accounts, they're not in Canada either. So this just leaves us with one conclusion. Mark Carney, pretty sure that he's going to entrench us in a relationship with China after he becomes Prime Minister of Canada. And it is going to make him and his portfolio and his business partners ridiculously rich.